Garrett, unemployment up, employers pulling back on hiring. It's not a good picture for a White House right now. How's the administration responding this morning?
Yeah, on a no formal statement from the White House yet, a lot of the president's allies in the Republican Party have tried to point to the broader health of the overall economy as a way of downplaying these numbers. But just a short time ago, one of the president's top economic advisors acknowledged that these numbers are troubling, particularly the downward revisions in previous months' job data that was released today. Take a listen.
The downward revisions to May and June are not great. A lot of that was due to quirks of a statistical process called seasonal adjustment, about 60% of it due to changing seasonal factors and things like incorrectly capturing teachers. But what that means is that most of those jobs will appear in other months of the year. Some of it is due to our border policies.
So some of that you hear the White House basically trying to blame this on technical quirks of how the jobs data is calculated. I'm not an economist, but the idea that seasonality somehow is changing from year to year or teachers' schedules are changing from year to year, I don't know entirely pass muster. Ana, the White House, I think, is likely to be on the defensive about this for the rest of the day.
Ana, what do these job numbers signal to you?
Yeah, so it was kind of an ugly report this month, much weaker than expected. Those revisions erasing the gains that we had seen earlier. I mean, another notable thing is that the United States is month after month, it seems, shedding manufacturing jobs. And so this is one of the goals of President Trump's tariffs to revive manufacturing. But it seems like, tariffs are raising costs of inputs for factories. They are raising prices, and that can slow economic growth. So I think what we're seeing with this report is really the first evidence of these tariffs hitting the economy. And we've seen that in other numbers, inflation numbers as well. That's something that many economists expect to kind of build and become more obvious over time.
Diane, what kind of pressure could this create for the White House and for Jerome Powell?
Well, this is really a hard report for the Federal Reserve, especially with the two dissents that we saw at the July meeting. The one thing that Chris Waller was consistently concerned about, which I had empathy for, was the narrow margin of error in the labor market. We had three sectors that were essentially the three pillars holding up this stool on job gains since June of 2023. That was state and local government hiring, leisure and hospitality, and the healthcare and social assistance. Now we're down to one leg, and a one-legged stool does not stand for long. And that is what the Federal Reserve is currently going to be worried about, is this combination of factors. This is something they forecast, a mild bout of stagflation. So far, it's not increased the unemployment rate because we've actually lowered the threshold on what is needed to keep the unemployment rate at 4.2%. And that is that we've shrunk the civilian labor force. We've seen 1.4 million foreign-born workers leave the labor force entirely since April. That is a stunning amount. It's not seasonally adjusted, but it's the largest amount we've seen move from employed to no longer in the labor force since the pandemic. That is really a startling number, holding unemployment down. Otherwise, we would have had a much higher unemployment number. And in fact, the ranks of the unemployed went up, along with those who had to accept part-time work instead of full-time work. Those are all signs of economic stress in the underlying labor market. And the one piece of sort of silver lining was that wages accelerated, but that was really driven by a quirk that was a seasonal quirk. It was in retail. And what we saw was a lot of minimum wages went through in the month of July that bumped up retail wages, but also that's not something they seasonally adjust for, these minimum wage hikes. And so it was an outsized hike. It was 1.2% in 1 month in retail, which is going to be reversed in the month of August.
Well, you explain why all this is significant. And Ana, I was thinking about how just a couple days ago, I think it was Howard Lutnick who was taking a victory lap when the GDP number came out at 3% and was saying, this is Trump's economy. And yet whenever anything negative has happened economically, President Trump has blamed Biden. Does Trump own these jobs numbers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question, right? So the economy is a big place, and typically, presidents, both Democrats and Republicans alike, have less influence over it than you might think. It's got its own energy that persists from administration to administration. But I do think that, the president is making just dramatic and remarkable changes to trade and economic policy these days, as Diane was mentioning with immigration, as I was talking about with tariffs. And we really are starting to see some of the ramifications of that spill into growth and into inflation. It will certainly become more obvious in the months to come. And the U.S. economy is still a pretty resilient place. But yes, I think it is rapidly becoming the president's economy.
Garrett, you spoke to the president last night about the new tariffs. So let's talk about where things stand this morning. How many countries actually have deals? Which countries don't? And what are the expectations from the White House about what happens now?
Yeah, on the dictionary definition of deals, only about 10 countries have something in place that both sides have agreed to. Much of the rest of the world has some kind of temporary arrangement in place or a unilateral tariff level set by the White House. Many of those smaller trading partners at or around 10%. That'll be kind of the stock in place. The revenue from these tariffs won't even start to be collected, at least the new ones, for another week or so. And the president made clear that he's still open to hearing offers from other countries that could come to him about lowering trade barriers or doing what we've seen from Japan, South Korea, the EU, to invest more in the United States or to make commitments to buy things like American oil and gas. Ana, we've talked about this before, but the president loves the idea of tariffs as a tool, as a way to compel action from foreign governments. And in our conversation, he was very clearly pleased with the manner in which he's been able to get all of these different concessions from governments around the world, and that his phone is available for other leaders who want to call and make an offer.
Ana, the tariffs have been all over the board. It's hard to make sense of a lot of the moves, like the military dictatorship of Myanmar having basically the same tariff rate as Switzerland. But if you're an American business, you mostly just care about your bottom line. As these tariffs go into effect, do businesses have clarity on the details?
So, no, there still is a lot that the government needs to explain. So, for example, there is often the government has been talking about a higher tariff rate for products made in countries that have a certain amount of Chinese content in it. To prevent goods from China from being routed around the world into the United States. We still don't know what that percentage that is. The administration has said that they will share that in about a week. There are a lot of other uncertainties about the fine print of these trade agreements, and we've often seen disagreements between the United States and foreign countries about what exactly was in that agreement. And then just the playing field has been shifting so dramatically for companies. So I've been talking to business owners who have been trying to deal with it. Some have been trying to bring in products ahead of the tariffs or just paused their shipments altogether. But it is a very confusing, kind of difficult landscape for companies that depend on either overseas supplies or overseas customers.
Diane, 90 deals in 90 days ended up being less than a dozen deals in 120 days. Some countries went from 1 or 2% to 10 to 50% tariff rates. So which key goods will be most impacted here and when?
Well, we're starting to see it already. The big ticket items have begun because of the aluminum and steel tariffs that are out there that are so high. It's showing up in appliances, it's showing up in furniture, it's showing up in toys, it's showing up in tools, in fitness equipment. So we're starting to see it come through. The goods inflation in the PCE index that we got yesterday actually was the largest on durable goods, big ticket items, excluding the autos, was the largest increase on a month since December of 2022. So it's starting to show up in those items first. And we know that it's going to show up in a lot more consumer staples as we get into the month of August. There's been a lot of announcements about that. And so it's going to be at the grocery store in many ways. That's everything from packaged goods to the aluminum cans that things go into. There's been some waivers there and some waivers not. And last time around, we know in 2018 and 2019, they did show up in consumer prices. And the bottom line, there's this stagflationary nature to these tariffs because they're so large. We're talking about doubling the tariff rate from effectively about 9% today to 18% by year end with what's in the pipeline. That is huge from less than 3%. There's no way that they don't both squeeze profit margins and show up in consumer prices, that's what makes them stagflationary. It's a headwind to employment, and it's a tailwind for inflation, and that's the challenge for the Federal Reserve. The other issue is the uncertainty, the uneven nature of the tariffs. The uncertainty is a tax in and of itself on the economy, and that just spiked again. And I think that's very important because that weighs on people's decisions, firms' decisions to hire up in this environment because they don't know where to place their bet and how to reshuffle their supply chains.
That's a really good point. And you have said that it can take 6 to 18 months for the full impact to kind of trickle through economically. Diane, the average U.S. tariff rate is now about 18%, according to the Yale Budget Lab. So that is the highest in nearly a century. Is this going to transform the American economy?
It will transform it, but not in all the ways I think that the administration would hope. And that's what we know, is we know from all of the research on these kinds of efforts. First of all, there are certain reasons to have tariffs for security reasons. We can debate those, but you want to have them more sparingly, and you want them paired with industrial policy. That's important to protect our security. That said, we know from 2018 and 2019, the steel tariffs cost more jobs than they created. They cost, for every 1,000 jobs they created in steel, 75,000 lost in manufacturing overall because of higher input costs. You can't just flip the switch on factories overnight. And we already have over 400,000 jobs that are still unfilled in the manufacturing sector, where manufacturers say they can't find the workers to fill those jobs. So it begs the question of, are these the kinds of jobs that are going to be created? They're not the same as they were in the past. And do people have the skills necessary to work in these kinds of jobs that are highly automated factories now with a lot fewer workers if you were able to bring things home? So I think all of those things need to be taken into account when you think about this. And the evidence on all the tariffs historically, there's a reason that economists don't like them, is because they tend to have this exact impact.